Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Commissioner, we thank you for being here today. As you know, this is an issue of particular concern to me because it's a particular concern to a lot of Ohioans. In fact, Senator Hatch and I were the first people to raise this issue when Ohio's 501c4s were being asked inappropriate things by the IRS. The document requests didn't seem to make sense. We sent the first letter on this back in the March of 2012. And unfortunately, it continues today. There's an Ohio-based C4 group called Unite for Action that still hasn't received a determination on its tax-exempt request that it first saw it in 2012. So, you know, just to remind us why we're here, the IG report and our bipartisan report, not talking about, you know, a Republican report, all said the same thing, which is that there were words used to screen 501c4 applications like Patriot, like 912, like Tea Party. 70% of the cases tagged for additional review, 70% were Tea Party cases. And to quote our report, and again consistent with what the IG said, such groups were disproportionately impacted. No question about it. So just to remind everybody while we're here, that's the issue. And of course there's distrust when that sort of thing happens. And of course there should have been consequences. So I'm going to focus a little on fostering this sense of accountability you talked about in your testimony. I couldn't agree with you more. And real accountability comes, of course, from consequences. I'm one of those people, as you know, on this committee who believes that my constituents are suffering because of a lack of funding at the IRS. I think taxpayer service is important, and I'd like to see us increase the funding for taxpayer service. But it's very difficult to have any kind of increased funding for anything at the IRS as long as there's this lack of accountability and a lack of this sense that there will be consequences for action. So let me be specific with you. You talked about fostering a sense of accountability. You talked about the fact that we need to ensure that this happens all through the system. You answered a question today saying you sense that IRS employees now feel more comfort in being able to talk to you and go up through the command. Let me ask you this question. For those who were involved in the mismanagement, shall we say, of the conservative group tax-exempt filings, were there any consequences? Any consequences?
As I said, the entire chain of command, starting with the commissioner or then the acting commissioner down 5 levels, are all no longer with the agency.
Yeah, they've all retired with full pensions or they've been reassigned?
Well, I can talk to you in private. I can't talk about individual cases.
Okay, well, that's what the public information indicates. Let me give you an example. December of last year, Treasury Inspector General found that between 2010 and 2013, before your time, a lot of this, 323 former employees were rehired by the IRS for whom records show performance and conduct issues associated with their previous employment resulted in them leaving through formal removal or separation or termination or leaving during an ongoing investigation.
Yes, those are primarily temporary and seasonal employees, and we've changed that policy to make sure that that does not happen in the future.
Okay. This goes to accountability. I'm glad to see you change that policy. As you know, under the Restructuring Reform Act, which I was a co-author of, the IRS is allowed to terminate employees who willfully violate tax law unless the penalty is mitigated by the commissioner. In April, the Inspector IG found that between 2004 and 2013, almost 1,600 employees had willfully violated tax law. 61% were handed lesser suspensions, such as reprimands or counseling. Worse, a number of these employees received promotions and awards within a year of their willful noncompliance with tax law. So again, this sense of accountability has to have consequences.
And in response to that, again, reflects prior practices. We've made it clear that there will be no promotions and awards made in the year in which there is an inability to comply with the procedures and policies. So if there are disciplinary actions, there won't be promotions, there won't be awards.
That's good. Still, you know, 1,600 employees willfully violate, 61% lesser suspensions. So accountability.
And the other 40% actually were either suspended or dismissed. We actually dismiss a substantial number of people every year for violations of the rules. And I'd be delighted to get you that detail.
That'd be helpful. Section 2C of the bipartisan report goes in some detail about the destruction of the 422 tapes that served as a backup to Lois Lerner's destroyed hard drive. You know about this. We've talked about it today. These backup tapes were destroyed sometime in early 2014. At the time, they were the subject of a litigation hold. Your Chief Technology Officer, Terrence Millihand, has actually called the destruction of these backup tapes, quote, more significant than the loss of Lois Lerner's hard drive. Can you tell us today how the employees that disregarded the litigation hold were held accountable for the destruction of this information relevant to the committee's investigation?
As the Justice Department notes, there's further activity going on that, again, I will be delighted to keep the committee advised in terms of what happens beyond that. But again, those are two individual cases. As I say, as a general matter, both the IG in their year-long investigation and Justice found that no one purposely destroyed those tapes, the employees involved, trying to obstruct anybody's investigation. They thought of them as junk, and they did not understand the litigation or the document retention program. But that's been thoroughly investigated by both the IG and the Department of Justice, and both of them found that the employees thought they were doing the right thing.
Understanding there's been no consequences for not honoring that litigation hold. Bipartisan report also talks about the failure of the IRS to produce responsive documents to a 2010 FOIA request. If that FOIA request had been responded to properly, it's my belief we could have avoided a lot of this, maybe all of it. It was not responded to properly. Our bipartisan report found that these documents could have, again, kept the scandal from happening, and that the search was sufficient. IRS narrow reading was to exclude responsive documents. Again, since our report has been released, has there been any attempt to impose consequences on those who didn't properly respond to this FOIA request that could have stopped this whole thing in the first place?
That was some time ago, and I'd be happy to get you that information. But I would note that you're exactly right. My sense of this before I even started was if somebody in 2012 had said, you know, we have a problem, we're trying to learn how to process all of these issues, and that had gone up the chain of command, it had become public, then we would have avoided a lot of unnecessary expense.
Mr. Chairman, I just have two more quick questions. One, a report goes to multiple mistakes made by various employees on the be on the lookout list, so-called BOLO list. Have any mid-level managers been reprimanded for their role in these mistakes?
Briefly, Commissioner, because Senator Casey was passed over and he's been waiting a long time. He was before.
No, I would just note again that both the IG and the Department of Justice have found that no employee behaved improperly in the sense of political bias or doing something that was out of the ordinary.
Well, again, our report, bipartisan report, says multiple mistakes. We understand that not only have there been no consequences, but in fact, based on page 101 of our bipartisan report, some were actually promoted. So again, culture of accountability needs to be in place for us to be able to begin this process of regaining the trust of my constituents, the American people. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.